Well, Jets fans, after many weeks of speculation and waiting, the Jets finally did it. Today, they signed former Packers Tim Boyle to the roster. Glenn, I don't know what to make of this. What's going on? I thought we were getting Aaron Rodgers. Somehow we got buffooned into Tim Boyle here. But if you look at some of his nice preseason throws, he's kind of okay. Don't look at his college stats, but look at his preseason throws. How we doing, Glenn?
He threw 1 touchdown in 3 years in college. That's got that's gotta be a record. There can't be another NFL quarterback who threw 1 touchdown in college. I'm looking at him like, was he a running back in college and he, threw some trick plays? No, 13 interceptions. So he was more than just yeah, so 1 TD, 13 picks in college, found his way into the NFL somehow. He's hung around for a couple years. I've been busy the last few hours, so I haven't had a chance to go back and try to find any passes he threw in an actual game. But yeah, I mean, listen, you need somebody who knows the system in camp, right?
That's exactly it. And somebody tweeted at me because I put out a tweet saying, Timmy B, come on down. We're just basically recreating a Packers room from a couple years removed. And somebody said, what are your thoughts on Tim Boyle? Is he any good? I was like, he'll be a great camp arm. And hopefully that's it. Because, I mean, as much as we don't want Zach Wilson to be quarterback too, I don't see how this plays out as him being quarterback too. And if so, they're still putting just as many eggs in the Rodgers basket as they did before the signing. So it is what it is. The other signing they did make, however, is one that could make bigger waves. At least on Jets Twitter, it made bigger waves. And that's the signing of Quentin Jefferson, defensive tackle. That happened just about an hour ago. So very fresh. I have not even gotten a chance. I put one tweet out using a couple of his stats from last year. He actually led the Seahawks in team sacks with 5.5. So that's kind of, although it's a low number, it's a good number for defensive tackles. And I saw a tweet saying he could be a very good rotational pass rusher with some 5-tech usage. So he could be kicked out to the outside as well. So kind of like a JFM mold of a player, so to speak. Do you have any thoughts on that signing?
No, same thing. I mean, all this happened while I was, we
Mm-hmm.
have a guest coming on a little bit, and I was finishing up his book. So I've peeked at the signings, and I've looked at took a quick glance at his PFF grade from last year. It was like 44, something along those lines. So I'm not going to pretend to know about the guy. I don't. PFF didn't think much of him. Not a starter, depth piece, and probably watch a little bit of him this week rather than sit here now and pretend I'm familiar with the Seahawks backup defensive lineman.
Yeah, exactly. I feel that exact same way. I'm hoping to get a couple of at least TV broadcasts of
I'm sure
Seahawks
somebody
games or
somewhere
something.
out there is, who has never seen him play a snap is talking about how either how wonderful or how terrible of a move this is.
Yeah,
Because you always have that.
exactly. I saw some people saying we still do need defensive tackle because of the role that he plays specifically. And I understand that everybody was kind of hoping for that two gapping, space eating defensive tackle. I know they had Al Woods in for a visit veteran from the Seahawks as well. But they end up with Quentin Jefferson, so more of a pass rush mold, which they're an attacking 4-3 front. So I assume like they want the guys that are going to attack more than they're going to run defend and just leave that for the linebackers to clean up. That's just my personal assumption about the situation. They could still very well draft or sign another two gapping, defensive tackle, more of the Nathan Shepard role, excuse me. So anyway, you have Quentin and Quinnen in the middle. That's not going to get confusing considering they're both obviously called Q. I tried to just YouTube a couple highlights of him. All I found was a mic'd up from a preseason game and a video where he had an altercation with a Jaguars fan as he was getting ejected from the stadium. No, I don't really put too much stock into that, but that's all that was on his YouTube. There wasn't much highlight at all. So if he comes with 5.5 sacks and that's what he's going to bring to the Jets, that's cool. He's 30 years old, or he just turned 30 last week. So another veteran at a spot of need. So they're going to rely on him pretty heavily at this point. I think it's just Quinnen and Solomon Thomas on the depth chart at defensive tackle. So they're pretty slim.
You
So
got to
other than
figure
that,
Tanzel Smart will be in the
oh,
mix
is he on a
too.
future? Yeah, he's on a future deal.
Yeah.
That's right. So yeah, you have four guys in the mix. Hopefully, like we said, Tanzel does get some snaps. Other than that, yeah, you did mention it. We are going to have a guest at some point. Former Jets player Paul Frase I believe I'm saying that correctly. He's going to come
Yep.
on, and Glenn's going to do an interview with him. He's going to promote his new book. So we're going to talk about that with him. And then at the end of the show, we're going to dive into the top 30 visits for the New York Jets each year. I don't know exactly how they're allowed or if it's exactly 30 visits they're allowed to get, but they get prospect visits with NFL draft prospects. And we have the list according to Walter Football and curated from a couple Twitter sites, tweets as well. And then at the very end, Glenn and I are going to go head to head. We didn't really talk about the parameters of these mock drafts, but we did each do a mock draft, and we're going to go head to head and see who basically came up with the better, draft for the Jets this year. So it actually looks like we do have Paul backstage right now. So what I'm going to do is let him have a second to get situated there, and he can throw me a thumbs up when he's ready. And then I'll back out and let you guys talk for a little bit.
Sure.
All right. I see that, and we're going to go.
All right. Hey, Paul Frase joining us now live. How are we doing, Paul?
Doing all right. It's a little warm here in sunny Florida.
Whereabouts in Florida are you nowadays?
In Jet Country, St. Augustine.
Okay. Oh God, yeah, nice little town up there. I lived in Florida for many years, but lived all over the place. Visited St. Augustine a couple times. Oldest schoolhouse in America, right? Oldest established city in the U.S.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, first established.
Discovered by Ponce de Leon, I believe. So.
Yeah. Some time ago I visited. So I had a chance to read your book today. Well, yesterday and today. It was it's not a light read. It's in terms of what you guys endured as a family. I'll leave you to sort of intro the book, break it down. We'll talk about it a little bit for our listeners about your son Joshua, and I'll leave it up to you. Again, he was I just literally finished it like an hour ago, and it was really it wasn't it's emotional. It's emotional. So
Yeah.
go ahead and say whatever you want. Let our listeners know.
Oh gosh. It's good to be amongst friends. Interestingly, my son Joshua was born when I was still a member of the New York Jets, and we were back in Dallas during the off season, and Joshua was born on February 2nd, and I actually was drafted in the expansion draft. I think it was February 15th or 18th, and Tom Coughlin was fresh out of college from Boston College, been in the NFL coach, at times, but he was like, "You got to be here. You got to give me 100%. When you're here." And I'm like, "Yeah, yes." And but the problem was, which I did. But the problem was Joshua had been born February 2nd with the muscle disorder, and it turns out he was one of 55 known cases in the world. So there was no research, there was no cure, there was no therapy. They couldn't even tell us how to keep our son alive. Gosh, I don't want to be Debbie Downer right into the story in the show, but
No, I'm so. I mean, it's like I said, there's not an easy way to broach the subject, right? I mean, sorry, I didn't give you a second to kind of prep. We just knew we were having you on, and like I said, I literally just finished the book, so it's really fresh in my mind. So
well, I'm going to give you a 2-minute and 30-second synopsis. Born 55 known cases in the world. We were told when the day he was born, we were told he probably will not survive the day. And then we found out 5 months later through a muscle and nerve biopsy, he had myotubular myopathy. Allison, his mom, was from Queens and Massapequa, Long Island, and had a lot of chutzpah. And I just was like, tell me how to keep my son alive. And before Joshua's first birthday, she said, we're going to use your platform in the NFL to raise a bunch of money. And we're going to figure this thing out because the doctors can't tell us. They have no clue. So, we went into high gear. I was still going to play in the NFL because we understood the insurance was so crucial to live our lives. So we were able to raise about $7 million over the next 10, 12 years. Research at Harvard, Boston Children's, Wake Forest Institute of Regenerative Medicine, University of Washington. We had two, a murine mouse model and a dog model, a proof of concept within, and by 2000, I think probably 11 or 12. And we went into clinical trials, and our goal was to save our son and then help. Our goal was to get a cure. Selfishly, we wanted to save our son. We wanted a cure for his peers, and then we wanted to help the families that we could help that were suffering with the disorder. Basically, we found out through research there's 5,000 to 8,000 kids out there with it. It's an orphan. It's an ultra orphan disease. And orphan disease means 200,000 patients or less worldwide. And Joshua passed 6.5 years, 7 years before we had a clinical trial, the commencement of a clinical trial. But
And that's what, in reading the book, as I'm going through it and not knowing that final chapter, if you're going to get to that point, like I'm reading and I'm thinking, please tell me they get to that point where there's something, where there's some type of breakthrough, whether it's, a cure, it's not going to that's not going to come as quickly, but I'm just reading it. And so when it gets to the chapter where you talk about Noah and, him being the patient who got the first ever treatment for the disorder, and kind of wondering myself as I'm reading it, and it was nice to see that Allison said she's, stays in touch with and has FaceTime chats with Noah, and that he's doing well, and it just the whole journey, you guys as a family. I'm a big anyone that knows me, like I bang on and on about how, with the adversity families face, whatever it may be, like the families that have the ability to stick together and work through these things, sometimes they work out great till the end. Sometimes they break down at some point, but the work that you guys did, working as a team, you obviously being an NFL player have that understanding of the importance of teamwork. And the two of you really seem to work so well together. And Allison with, the story about, the scrambling to get the dog in what was it, in Canada, right? Trying to catch the flight and buy a dog crate while she was up there, and everything sort of on the fly. It was really just that type of, is, of course it's a terribly sad story with your son, but the what shines through is the family working hard to get through it and get together, and then eventually getting to a point where you guys were able to get a trial. And it's a long way to go, I suppose, but that's a huge step. Like, you guys have done so much of the work, and that's what makes it, I don't know, I guess inspiring, for lack of a better term, in reading a story like that. Like, of course, it's incredibly sad for any parent, but there's like that light at the end of the tunnel. Like, okay, there was progress. As I say, like it wasn't for nothing. You know what I mean? All the work led to something that could be the first step in what is, a breakthrough that'll change lives.
right, I mean, we're going in very deep in just the first few minutes, but you are so right. And we were we were basically, nothing happened. Nothing in this life is a coincidence, and we really felt, you know, it, these kids, 55 known cases in the world, no money's going to research unless you're born to a politician, unless the kid is a politician's kid, or an NFL athlete's who has a wife who is raring to go, and wanting to find a cure, and not taking no for an answer. And that's what we did. I mean, you look back on it, and you think most people would do it if they were in our shoes, and I know there are some people that would, but the circumstances really, there was it wasn't, to have these circumstances, and I was playing in the NFL, making a little bit of money. I mean, I was a blue collar player. I wasn't a white collar player. I wasn't, making what Mark Gastineau was making, and all that fun stuff. But yeah, we have you ever seen the movie Lorenzo's Oil?
I have
It's
not.
It's a Nick Nolte story with and Susan Sarandon. They're the parents of a young boy that is perfectly normal at birth, and then he, about 3 or 4 years old, he comes to his demise. But he lives kind of in a vegetable state for the next 11, 12, 13 years, and he passes. But the parents find a therapy. And in the end of the trailer, the end of the credits are rolling, and you see these kids, little Johnny, at 12 years old, he received Lorenzo's oil, and it was a fatty chain acid, that's all it was, and they figured it out, and it was a therapy, and it was helping these kids, yeah, life deals you some funny hands sometimes, and you gotta stand up, and you're going to take your blows, that's for sure. We were just so blessed, so fortunate. I say, through the whole experience, it always could be worse, because Joshua, his mind was so clear, and he was a National Honor Society student. I didn't even know how to qualify for the National Honor Society, right? And I had to. The joke is, I had to dumb him down and make him watch The Office, and he would slap my thigh. Dad, Dwight Schrute is an idiot. Ah, it's just funny stuff, and it
Right,
was,
right.
yeah. So
Yeah,
yeah.
that's it's funny you talk about how different people would deal with it, because one of the thoughts I had as I was reading it and kind of tying into, like I said, all the work you guys were doing and how it chaotic it must have been, but it became the life that you guys knew and you lived it and you adapted to it. And anytime I see that, anytime I hear about people overcoming, not even overcoming, but managing, finding ways to work with things like that, it always reminds me of I don't know if you've ever read the book Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl,
Mm,
old POW in Nazi Germany, and he talked about
mm,
how, and he was a psychologist, and he said one of the things that really struck him in these camps was the unbelievable ability people have to adjust to their circumstances.
right.
um, and that's anytime I see it, anytime I hear or read about people who adjust to, when life throws you a curveball and you have no choice but to say, all right, how do we adjust to this? And you find yourself living a life or doing things you would have never anticipated or never thought possible. And like I said, you guys did it, and that's what, to me, that's what stood out in the book, other than Joshua's story in itself. But the book itself is called Game Changer. For anyone who wants to check it out, I got mine on Amazon. Read it on my Kindle over the last couple days. It's a moving book, emotional book, about a great kid and about a family who found ways to really, I mean, talk about beating the odds. As you said, you guys were told when he was born that he may not make it through the night.
Hmm.
Um, so he made it many years. He beat the odds, and that was another theme in the book, was the way you guys were able to educate yourself on his condition and speak to the doctors about things they may not have known, because again, when you're talking about a condition where there's only 50 some cases, there's a good chance that patient's going to know more. I remember being told by a pediatrician years ago. I worked in a pediatrician's office, and he said, if a parent comes to me and just says my kid isn't right, that's good enough for me. Bring them in for an appointment. I don't need the symptoms. Nobody knows their kid like a parent does. And they don't have to know it. They just have to know something's not right with my kid. And not every doctor does that. Some doctors are very arrogant and very sort of, I'm the doctor here. I don't need your input. And I'm sure you guys dealt with some of that. But the fact that you guys took on board so much information, were able to use that during his visits, and the paramedics when they came to your house and things like that, just really testament to the hours you guys put into to acting on his behalf.
Well, I appreciate those words, and yes, you're absolutely right. I remember one time Joshua was down; he was lungs collapsed, and the physician came in, and it turns out he's Kevin Sullivan from Long Island, New York, and Allison's from Long Island, and they freaking lock horns. But to his credit, he he actually he came in and he started barking orders and this and that and antibiotics and blah, blah, blah. And Allison was like, no antibiotics until we know it's a bacterial infection, because antibiotics won't work against the viral, because we don't want to lower his immune system, yada, yada.
Right.
So Kevin Sutherland, he actually backed up and he says, okay, well, let's talk about your child's care. What do you think we should do? And I think you read it. He's one of the excerpts of the doctors in the book.
Yeah.
He said his last sentence was, so if you want to make an ass of yourself as a doctor, don't listen to the parents that know their child way better than you.
Yeah.
So,
And as I said, yeah, that was one of the best things
yeah,
I was told by a pediatrician that I worked with is
child.
listen to the parents, man. They know.
Yeah.
It's something else. But like I said, it's called Game Changer. You can get it on Amazon. Check it out. It was like I said, it's an emotional read, but a great read. About strength and perseverance and on all of your behalf. So great job by you guys there. In navigating what was obviously not an easy situation.
Absolutely.
Um, yeah. So you mentioned earlier. To sort of segue to your playing days, Jets fans who will remember one of the names you mentioned, and he was one of the guys I was going to ask about. So much larger than life, playing with Mark Gastineau, being a defensive lineman, being in the D line room with Mark Gastineau. Listen, there were some really good guys in that group. You had Marty Lyons, really good player in his own right. Later on, Marvin Washington, who you mentioned in your book, he was actually one of the first players I ever interviewed when I started writing for JetNation many years
Oh,
ago.
yeah.
Reached out to him and he got right back to me, and he was really funny enough. Because years later it got picked up on. He was the first person I ever heard talking about some of these revolutionary treatments for CTE,
Right.
the cannabis type
Yeah.
treatments, and
Yeah.
and he was, and to me I was like, what is he talking about? Like I'd never
Right.
heard of it from anyone. And then funny enough, it was probably 2 or 3 years later, the New York Post runs this story. Oh, former Jet advocating for blah blah blah. It's like, oh, he told me that 3, but nobody cares because he told me. Nobody cares about that. But I was glad he was out there and active and working on that. But what was it like being in that D line room with some of those guys?
Oh, it was awesome. Yeah, I was there. Mark Gastineau, fortunately but unfortunately, I backed him up in my rookie year, and that was the year that he left in the middle of the season. So I got to start the rest of the year. So good for me, bad for him. But yeah, it was quite an event to hang out with Jeff Loggeman came in. He was our first. Dave Cadigan, my year was our
Cadigan.
first. Yeah, but Loggeman was the next year, and Marvin Washington, Ronnie Stallworth, and Scott Mercereau was our nose tackle. He was just a clown and a tough son of a gun. And of course, Dennis Bird. Wow, what a what a
Yeah.
what a unbelievable talent he was. Didn't have the athletic, unbelievable skills, but you you couldn't stop his chop move. You know, and after the third sack you suffered against him, you're like, what do I do?
Yeah, he was something else, and you mentioned him in your book as being a clown who, what he
Oh,
set you up and sprayed shaving cream on your tuxedo before your wedding or something, or isn't that he?
he filled my shoe with shaving cream. I come up, and it was a bye weekend, so I'm rushing to get down to the Burden Mansion in 95th and 5th or whatever it was, I don't know. And I come and I get all dressed and I put my shoe on, and the shaving cream just squirts out of it. The whole freaking locker room starts laughing. I look at Dennis, and Dennis is like, I'm
Right.
like, not funny, Dennis, but everybody else thought it was hilarious, of course. Yeah.
Yeah, that was. I mean, God, he was. He was something else. Loggerman too. Well, now I'm trying to remember. Did he go in the expansion draft too? Because he went. He just went as a
Yeah.
free agent, didn't he? Or was it
No,
expansion draft to Jacksonville?
he got paid. He went as a free agent,
Yeah.
exactly. And interestingly, Jeff and I were the two longest tandem teammates in the league for a couple of years. I played 7 years of the Jets. He came 1 year behind me, so we were six there, and
Hmm.
then two more in Jacksonville. I went to Green Bay and ended up in Baltimore another year and a year, and then Jeff played another 3 or 4 years for Jacksonville.
Okay. Yeah. And you also had trying to think Kyle Clifton, of course, at linebacker behind you guys. He was an all-time Jet. You know, he kind of you came along yourself sort of
I miss
right as I sorry.
I missed Lance Mel and Bobby Crable, and Kyle was their underling, and what a guy! I mean, they were all great. I met them all, but I'm sorry for
No, no,
interrupting.
that's fine. That's fine. I was gonna say I remember a lot of those guys fairly well because that's when I started watching. I was sort of, 12 years old, 13 years old in 87, 88, 89. So, I've memories of all those guys and they're not as vivid because because it's not yesterday anymore. It's been a little while, but I always remember Clifton because you were one of those guys. You were there for a long time, so when when Phil messaged me the other day and said, "Hey, we want to have Paul Frase on." I was like, "Oh my god, like that! How many years did I watch that guy play?"
Yeah,
But yeah, like I said, some really good players there. The secondary, I remember how long did you play with James Hasty? I thought he was a guy who.
I came in the same year, so we played. When did you go to Kansas City? I think no, we played. I was 7 years at Jets. We were the same draft to the Jets. He was the third round, I guess, maybe second, and Eric McMillan was
Mhm.
anyway. Um, when I went to Green Bay and after my 2 years with the Jaguars, I ended up playing against Eric preseason, Green Bay, Kansas City, out in Japan, Tokyo, and
Okay.
I hadn't seen him for like 4 or 5 years, and or 3 years, and all of a sudden I'm at the airport, buying a little airplane for Joshua on the way home, and James comes up to me behind me and says, "Hey, Frazee." James.
Yeah,
So
I feel like he was one of the he was really good as a Jet, but he seemed to I don't know if it was just leaving the Jets, but he got a lot of recognition when he left. I feel like he got a lot more accolades. Like people didn't realize how good he was when he was
oh
a Jet, James Hasty. And then once he landed with the Chiefs, he was, held in much higher regard and it felt like he was an
yeah,
underrated player in that secondary for sure.
yeah, he was a lockdown. He was, and EMAC, and I didn't remember. I was looking at one of Eric McMillan's posts, 6 months ago, and I was like, he picked off Dan Marino 3 times in one game. And I was playing in the game. It's
That's the thing. Sometimes there's so much going on, you don't have time to stop and look at the numbers and
yeah,
you kind of focus on the next play and things like that. But
yeah,
he had some couple of really good seasons with the Jets for sure.
he
Um,
did.
One guy that you were only around for one season, and I'm curious what you thought of him because of what he went on to be, was your head coach Pete Carroll.
Yeah,
Um, your final year, if I'm not mistaken, was Carroll's first year,
yeah,
before you went in the expansion draft.
yeah.
Young guy, you knew him, of course, he was your defensive coordinator prior to getting the head coaching job. Did you think he was ready for it? Do you think he was a little too young? Or did you
Uh,
think and did you think he would eventually go on to be a great coach?
I didn't think he was ready for it, not because he was too young, but because he had that West Coast laissez-faire. They're going to make it. They're going to be okay if they're getting good enough to get in the combines and the draft, and we drafted them. They're going to fall into place. Well, the problem was the money was starting to get so big. The signing bonus is a couple $1,000,000, and the kids would come in and say, "I don't have to listen to you." And if you weren't a coach that yanked on the reins and tightened them up like a Tom Coughlin with a bunch of new kids and a brand new team and a bunch of old veteran or a few older veterans, if you didn't tighten it up and then loosen it up slowly, Pete would just go in and he was just like, I remember Pete says to Bill Pickell. Bill Pickell was an old time Raider, won a Super Bowl. Then he was in the twilight of his career at the Jets, and he was still a tough son of a gun. And he played after I left, and Pete was like, "Bill, what are the rules?" And Bill was the old wily veteran, and Bill's like, "Don't be late." And Pete's like, and
Right.
this is open and team meeting. I was like, "Okay, don't be late." It was like 2 or 3 rules, and that was it. Now, and then he went up to New England, kind of still didn't pull the reins in tight, and then he goes to USC and he learns about the new NFL player for 13 years. And then he's ready to go. Pete was the best defensive coordinator I've ever had. We were standing in the lobby 3 hours before the game, and he'd say, Frazee, are you ready? You remember this? The pirate, you got this? Okay, Hasty, you got this? And we're like, yeah, we're ready to go. And he was just phenomenal. And everywhere he went, I mean, we had a Jets defense was number 4, number 5. Offense might have been 26, but whatever. And we would stay in games. And yeah, so obviously you get to Seattle, the defense starts getting better. Went from 28 to 23 to 16 to, and all of a sudden Russell Wilson comes.
Mhm.
And Pete's defensive mind with a quarterback like Russell, you got a chance.
Yeah,
And
yeah, they did obviously did some pretty special things up there. So yeah, that I because Pete Carroll was sort of he was a young coordinator when you didn't have a lot of young coordinators.
oh yeah,
I remember that was one of the big stories when the Jets hired him, like, oh, this young kid, is he going to be ready for the job? And obviously, he made an impression, and that was sort of that I remember that being the rap when he was let go, that ownership felt Pete was too comfortable with or too easy on the players, like, hey, let's go practice early and go play basketball, like that type of thing. And I think there was some I think I remember reading years ago that ownership saw that and didn't like it, and they thought he's not strict enough, sort of what you're saying. He's not clamping down on these guys. So but in the end, like you said, he went to USC for 10, 12, 13 years, and it obviously worked for him.
well, and also Seattle was perfect. He had structure. He had gained that much needed structure, and he was tougher. But Seattle was just the Legion of Boom, and that was his style, right? He let it go. He
Right.
didn't he didn't squash those guys. He let them play, and
Yeah.
then yeah. But he's a great guy, and actually Pete Carroll and Glenna, his wife, every single year. And Pete, when he was up in New England, came to one of our big Muscle Dream Team galas and
The Gallas, yeah.
helped us raise money for the foundation. And Pete he's been writing a check every single year,
Oh, wow.
helping us find a cure. And
That's
he,
fantastic. Like, you just love hearing stuff like that because
oh
it's
gosh,
so rare you get the sort of the human side of the players, the coaches, and stuff, especially something like that. Like, it's sometimes when there's a camera in the room, it's like, well, is this something set up by the agent? Or so to
yeah.
know that that's like a behind the scenes, kept quiet, like that I love hearing that type of stuff because not everybody who has the ability to do that chooses to.
Mm.
So that's great to hear that. But thanks so much for joining us, Paul. Really appreciate having you on. Like I said, I recommend the book to anybody out there, any Jets fans, any fan of anybody, anyone dealing with adversity and for looking for people who navigated it for quite some time.
I absolutely appreciate this. I've been wanting to get to the Jet Nation, to the fans of the Jets, my time in New York was second to none. It was great. It was wonderful. When do me a favor when you go to Amazon, there's a lot of game changers on Amazon. So Google Amazon Paul Frase or Amazon Allison Rocket, and it will come right up. And when you do get a book through Amazon, please, please, please leave a review because Amazon has all those algorithms and stuff. And we want this story out there. We want people to experience Joshua and to learn about the hope, the love, and the inspiration that he gave each and every one of us. And last thing, if you know some family member or somebody in the community that's dealing with a disability, and you know the child well enough to go to the parents and say, you need a night off once a month. Go to the movies, go to dinner, and watch their kid, or pay for a nurse to watch their kids. You will not, you cannot imagine what not one night of respite will do with a family that is dealing with a critical disorder or devastating disorder. So
Yeah, that
it's
that was actually one of the more touching stories. Was the one where you talked about how you and your wife took a day away for the first time in forever, and you could see a family with a child who was unwell, and you didn't know them from you'd never met them before, but took the time to go over and sort of offer some encouraging words and say hello to their son and tell them that you knew what they were going through and that you understood their struggle. And that, I don't know, I thought that was great, a great gesture from you guys. But again, thanks again so much for coming on, Paul. It's much appreciated. I will, like I said, I finished the book a couple hours ago. I will be leaving my Amazon review here in the next 24 hours. It'll be
Hey,
up there. And yeah, I had that same issue. I put in Game Changer and a million books came up, put in Game Changer Paul Frase, and there it was. So
exactly.
um so check it out, Jets fans. Thanks a lot, Paul. We appreciate it.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank
Go
you.
Jets.
All right, I think you're muted there, Dylan. There
Yeah, I
you go.
just wanted to get off mute there. That was a really good interview. That was
Yeah, he's a good guy, from all accounts. And when Phil said we could have him on, I was like, I was absolutely want to do it. And it's like I said, I said to him, it's not a light read. Like, it's emotional, but I don't know. I love the strength, the intestinal fortitude, families dealing with adversity and pushing through that stuff. And it's like, it's something you never want to have to do yourself, but to me, it's inspiring to see other people do it. And him and his wife really, for years and years, working together. It's a great story. I highly recommend it. You can get through it in a couple of days. It's not, it's not a 600-700 page book. It's a couple hundred pages. And
Mhm.
highly recommend it. But yeah, back to our thing here. Back to
Yeah, and if you guys follow me on Twitter
2022.
at @dtereman, I did put out the link, everything he said, how to Google it, how to find the book
Oh, good
properly. I
job.
will also link after the show. I will link the direct link from Amazon straight to the book into the tweet thread. So we really appreciate Paul for coming on. We appreciate you for doing that interview. Yeah, unfortunately, I'm just right outside that generation of. I was born in
Yeah,
'95, so it's like his playing days with the Jets right after, so. All right, we can get into it now. I think the next topic is top 30 visits. We can just kind of explore that and we'll just kind of get into the mock draft from there because it'll kind of go hand in hand, I think. Actually, let's start with this. McShay put out mock draft 4.0. For those on, if you have ESPN Plus, I highly recommend it if you don't. It's like the easiest, subscription I've paid for. He put out a 2-round mock draft this time, so a little different. I think he was the first one to do a 2-round mock draft of all the big name guys. He had, let me scroll down here, at 13, I believe he had the Jets taking, damn, I lost it now. Did he have us taking Broderick Jones? I know I tweeted it to you in the DMs. I believe it was Broderick Jones, and then he had us keeping both 2nd-round picks. So we picked back to back, although we still think one's going to go to Green Bay. And he had us taking Joe Tittman and shit. Now I forgot the whole thing because I lost the tweet.
There are children listening to this show. Come on.
There are children listening. I'm sorry, Glenn.
This profanity.
Excuse me. As I pull up the tweet. Jeez. We talk too much on Twitter. There's too many tweets to go through. All right, here it is. Somewhere. This is great for airtime. Where is it? God damn. I've lost it. I've completely lost it. Does the tweet exist anymore? I don't know. Either way, he had the Jets keeping both 2nd-round picks. So that was going to be my first question to you about your mock draft specifically that we're going to get into. Did you keep both 2nd-round picks, or did you go ahead, assume the parameters of the Aaron Rodgers trade went through? We don't have one or both 2nd-round picks. How did you handle that? And as I pull up Todd McShay's mock draft.
Yeah, we probably should have discussed that ahead of time. But I kept both picks. I played the role of Joe Douglas. I turned off my cell phone, and I decided I was not going to turn it back on until after the draft and resume talks with the Packers. If they don't like it, too bad. You want to pay Aaron Rodgers $60 million to sit on your bench? I don't think so. The San Francisco 49ers, don't listen to Craig Carton. What happens to people who listen to Craig Carton? Things don't work out well. Don't listen to Craig Carton. There's no mystery teams getting involved. It's the Jets. And if you're going to trade for Aaron Rodgers, which the Jets are the only team that's going to do that, there's going to be a lot of money involved. And the Packers, like I said, they're not paying these psychopaths who think, oh, well, we'll just keep him then. Sure, you'll pay a guy $60 million. Aaron Rodgers can pocket that money and walk out the next day.
Yeah.
Like,
Or you
there's
can
no
trade
getting
him.
around that.
Don't trade him to the Jets. Trade him to the Patriots or the Dolphins for a 7th-round pick.
Yeah, that'll show the Jets.
Yeah. It's straight buffoonery on Twitter in regards to Aaron Rodgers. I found the mock draft fully. I pulled it up. I'm only going to give away the Jets picks, obviously, because it's behind a paywall. He had us taking Paris Johnson, so not Broderick Jones. Paris Johnson at 13. No trades in this mock for the Jets, at least. And then at 42, he has us taking Joe Tittman from Wisconsin. So I got one of the three right. And then 43, he had Brian Branch, the safety / nickel corner from Alabama. And I just wanted to get your thoughts. How do you feel about, obviously, I think I know your thoughts on Tittman, but what about Branch falling all the way to 43? Do you think that's actually a possibility, or do you think that's a little bit more hopeful than it is anything on McShay's behalf?
I think it's possible. We do develop these biases. Like, I want Jason Taylor at second. I don't know,
Mm-hmm.
Oklahoma State. I don't know what round he's going to go in. I've seen him mocked as late as I've seen him as undrafted. I've run some simulations. He doesn't
Yeah.
get picked. Guy had 6 interceptions last year. All he did was make plays. He had a ton of pass breakups. Not the most physical guy. Like, he's physical enough, but like he's not a downhill blow guys out of the water, kind of big
Mm-hmm.
hitter. But he's fundamentally sound as a tackler, and he for the value I think where you could get him, I would rather see him. I think Branch is I struggle sometimes, and I have the same thing with Henry 2020, like with Alabama players. Like, they are so loaded with talent that, like, they're never gonna, like, they're just better than everyone they line up against 99% of the time, and I think it
Mm-hmm.
makes their lives a lot easier. And I think that's why sometimes we see a drop off with these guys. I don't think he's as athletic as you would like for a guy who's gonna have to cover a lot of ground. Um, and I think I don't love that pick there. Especially with those first 3 picks. It's got to be, to me, it's got to be O line, and whether we like it or not, I think they're sticking with Whitehead clearly.
Oh,
Um,
yeah. At this point,
you
it
know,
has to
I'm
be.
I'm
Mm-hmm.
I want those picks to go on spots where, like, they don't have a guy.
Mm-hmm.
I want to tackle. Receiver is different because they have receivers, but you play a bunch of them. You can have 5 and play
Yeah.
them. And I want another one, and I want a linebacker because you know, Quincy Williams, I get it, he's coming back, but he's an inconsistent guy. And then, of course, CJ Mosley is a bit long in the tooth. So I'm thinking linebacker. I would wait on safety till a little bit later. Now, look, if they love him that much at safety, then Brian Branch and they grab him, fine. But I feel like I feel like he's, not that it matters a great deal, but I feel like he's falling out of favor. I don't see him getting mocked in the first round nearly as much as he was just a month ago.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure I heard people mocking him to the Jets at 13.
Oh, yeah.
Now I see him getting mocked in the third, late second, early third round. So I think he's sort of falling down some draft boards, at least the media draft boards, which take that for what you will.
Yeah, and I can't remember who it was that put the mock draft out, but it was like one of the very first mock drafts from one of the NFL Network or ESPN guys, and it was Brian Branch at 13. So I remember for a couple of days everybody was, having a fit about the Jets drafting a safety at 13, and it felt like that was his range. And I put out a safety video on Monday. You can go back and watch that on the YouTube channel as well, and I talked about prospects other than Brian Branch because I said exactly what you said. Although it seems like he's sliding out of some mock drafts, I feel like he's probably going to end up being a first round pick, especially if a team looks at him like a nickel corner. I could totally see them going, okay, let's go in the back end of the first round, get that extra 5th year option, excuse me. So Brian Branch is somebody that I don't think will be there at 43. And when I saw that, I was like, oh, wow, this is like one of the best mock drafts I've seen the Jets have in such a long time. But then you kind of peel back the layers of the onion and you understand, like, maybe one of those picks isn't there in the second round and you have to decide between Tittman and Branch. And you stay at 13? I know, like, it's probably not looking like they're going to move out of the pick, but I feel like it was almost a too good to be true mock draft from McShay. So although I was very happy with it, I felt like it wasn't like, oh, let me go put out a tweet about this because I'm so over the moon that this could actually be a thing. Now, when we get into our mock drafts, you'll see a similar structure of player needs and choices where we've picked them, but I don't necessarily think it's going to be those players specifically. So we can talk about our top 30 visits. Do you have the list up, or do you need me to rattle off some of the names that we?
I have it on my phone. Probably easier if you've got it there.
Yeah, I have it here. So this is according to WalterFootball.com. Most of these, I think I have 4 players that were not listed on his site that it's known that they went and visited with the Jets in some capacity. We don't exactly know the capacity of which they did, but Walter Football does a great job breaking it down. So from the top alphabetically, Brian Branch, safety, Alabama; Julius Brents, cornerback from Kansas State; Jair Brown, safety from Penn State; McClendon Curtis, offensive tackle from Chattanooga; Braden Daniels, offensive guard from Utah; Joey Fisher, offensive tackle from Shepherd; Bryce Ford Wheaton, wide receiver, West Virginia; our guy, Deion Henley, linebacker, Washington State, who was a private visit just a couple days ago; Andre Yoshivas, wide receiver, Princeton. He's a local visit, he's a New Jersey school; Broderick Jones, offensive tackle, Georgia; Truman Jones, edge, Harvard, one of the first guys I haven't heard of before. Broderick Martin, defensive tackle, Western Kentucky, another guy. Scott Matlock from Boise State, another defensive tackle, a guy I have not heard of again. Dwayne McBride, running back, UAB. Ventrell Miller, linebacker, Florida, a guy we've talked about numerous times on the pod. Aiden O'Connell, quarterback, Purdue. There's a subset of Jets Twitter that's very happy about that. BJ Ojulari, edge, LSU. Trevor Reed, offensive tackle, Louisville. Our guy, John Michael Schmidt, center, Minnesota, who actually had 3 visits with them, combine, private, and a workout. Luke Schoonmaker, tight end from Michigan. Mozzie Smith, defensive tackle, Michigan. Feldman Freaks, number 1 on his list as the number 1 freak entering 2022. Starling Thomas, cornerback, UAB. Carrington Valentine, cornerback, Kentucky. Owen Wright, running back, Monmouth, another local kid. Chandler Zavala, offensive guard, North Carolina State. So they're kind of all over the map. And I think that's how most visit lists do look. There's some top guys, there's a couple middle guys, and there's some guys that are probably not going to get drafted, and they need to get another exposure before the draft happens to see if they're worth that 5th, 6th, 7th round pick, or if they can wait till a priority free agent. As soon as the draft ends, that'll be one of their first calls. And I've said it on the pod before, if it's like a 6th or 7th round guy, even like a 5th round guy, they probably have a grade that's basically splitting hairs, and it comes down to things that you would only learn from a player in the meetings. So I think it's really important that they're getting guys from all over the landscape of the board. There's a lot of guys I haven't heard of, and a lot that I still need to study. But I went back and I looked at the list from 2022 because I kept the list separate from Walter Football. I didn't know if they had like access to years past, so I'm glad I kept the list from last year. And it looks like 4 of the 7 drafted players they had a visit with last year were they took, and an undrafted free agent. So it was Sauce Gardner, Garrett Wilson, Jermaine Johnson, and Tony Adams. So they all had private visits with the Jets. And I took that going into my mock draft and said, okay, well, how can I apply that to some of the guys who took private visits with the Jets? And I looked at Deion Henley was a private. We would assume that Broderick Jones earlier this week was a private visit. Scott Matlock from Boise State, Dwayne McBride from UAB, and John Michael Schmitz. Those are your private guys. So you would have to think those guys are somewhat on a priority list to the Jets and Joe Douglas. So when you hear the names on this list, are there any guys specifically that you were targeting, or any guys that you were happy to see or sad to see, or guys you want to hear more about?
Well, I never know how to take them. I know, like you said, they got 4 guys last year who they had on visits. But I'd be curious to see what it was like the year before and the year before that. Like,
Exactly.
because you don't want to do that every year, because then you're tipping your hand a little too much.
Right.
I know what happens a lot, but I think the example that I remember hearing most recently was Willie McGinnis with the Patriots. He was like, they didn't do a thing on him before the draft. Personally, they didn't. He said they didn't have a conversation with him at a bowl game or an all-star game. They didn't call him before the draft. He didn't know. None of his coaches let him know the Patriots were looking at him. Like, they kept it that quiet. And you hear about it. You hear about teams that they say, like, we are not going to show any interest in this guy. We want, like, what we've seen on film is enough, and we're going to take him. But then you get if you're the Jets, like, I would love John Michael Schmitz. I would love Joe Tippmann. So if you like one, do you have the other in for a visit? Like, hey,
Right.
we'd really like this guy, so let's have this guy's name come out on a list that we're visiting with the other guy. So, teams that we are fearful might take Tippmann won't feel as threatened. They might think they can wait a little, or maybe they don't have to trade up in front of us. Um,
Right.
so who knows? But I love the Schmitz visit. Of course, the Henley visit got me pretty pumped. Um, I know that there's a few guys on there like super small school guys. One of them I
Yeah.
can't even remember. There was what was it?
Monmouth, Harvard,
El-
Princeton,
Elijah
most
Harper.
Shepherd.
I looked up Elijah Harper on YouTube, and like I don't know if it's the quality of the video with some of these smaller schools,
Yeah.
but I'm watching this kick. It was like a 95-yard kick return. He looked so slow. Everybody on the field looked so slow.
Oh man.
I'm like, this can't be. It's hard, but I feel like that happens every year. Like you watch when the film isn't that 4K, super clear, super sharp. I
Yeah.
feel like
Yeah.
everyone looks a little bit slower. But again, I've no idea other than watching a couple minutes of YouTube highlights. Couldn't really tell you anything about him. Did you mention Diabetes, the linebacker?
No, so I haven't checked the
Okay,
website
sorry.
recently.
Yeah,
This is just my spreadsheet. There might be a couple add-ons from
okay.
last
I just
night.
this is somebody shared a link on JetNation. It's NFL trade rumors.
Okay.
And they've got I just pulled it up while you were speaking. Justin Broyles, Oklahoma safety. I watched him a little bit because I messaged you yesterday about Eric Gray. I watched about 3 Oklahoma games yesterday. Broyles didn't
Yeah.
stand out a whole lot. So I mean, he did have a really nice PBU on a ball in the back of the end zone on a red zone pass. But again, didn't see a ton of him. I was, primarily focusing on the offensive side of the ball for Oklahoma,
Mhm.
and their D line. Look, we always say it's so tough with the TV angles, and I know we have the all 22 stuff now that I
Yeah.
kind of haven't transitioned to that because, like I said, I have so many games that
You're backlogged. Yep.
I've clipped up and cut up. I don't have time to get into new games. So hopefully more of that. But Holton, DeMarvion Overshone was listed on here on NFL trade rumors. He's a guy that I loved last year. I think that it doesn't surprise me that they're bringing in Henley Overshone because we've seen the Jets
Yep.
transition safeties to linebacker. Both those guys are college safeties that transition to linebacker. So they've
Exactly.
already made that transition that the Jets seem to be in favor of. Jair Brown. I
Mhm.
haven't looked. I actually wanted to look at his measurements, his wingspan, because I've watched a couple of Penn State games last week, and he had some tackles where I mean he was able to reach out and grab guys where you're watching the play unfold and thinking he's not he's not going to be able to make that tackle because he's not in the range, and just swoops out with that arm and dragging guys down. And I thought, God, he's got to have some pretty long limbs.
I don't
Um,
have his wingspan, but according to the combine, he was 31 1/4 inch arms, which is pretty high for a cornerback or a safety, excuse me. I
yeah,
remember he was DJ's safety one because technically he puts Brian
he
Branch
was,
in the
yeah,
corner category. And I
right.
remember when he ran his 4.65 at the combine, DJ saying he plays faster than that. So somebody I definitely want to get into more was Jair Brown. I did have a couple notes because I thought it was interesting how many of each position they had visited with. 4 offensive tackles. Now it's 3 guards because, excuse my dog, because you'll see Nick Saldiveri from Old Dominion was added to the list according to Walter Football. So now 8 total offensive linemen, 3 defensive tackles who we've obviously signed one earlier today, and then 3 cornerbacks. And I understand 2 of the cornerbacks were guys that I had never heard of or like very, low down the board guys. But they also met with Julius Brents, who's a second round, maybe third round corner, depending on who you ask. Our friend of the pod, Chris Schubert, will go off about Julius Brents if you bring up that we had a visit with
Yes.
him. So he's a big fan of his. So it's interesting that corner was one of the top positions that they looked at, albeit some of those guys are not the very top of the list at their position. I do see a couple questions in the chat here from Braden. Who is the most likely trade down partner if we trade out of 13? And what do you think the comp is? The second part is obviously a lot harder because I think it depends on what position they're coming up for. But like big brains say, like the Ravens get rid of Lamar and they want to come up for a quarterback, they could give us something to jump up 10 spots if somebody slides. I also think that they're willing to get in on the cornerback market if the run happens there and they want to jump the Patriots. So I would say the Ravens are probably my most likely preferred trade partner because I also don't want to move back too far. I think they're at 22 or 23. So any thoughts on the trade situation from 13? I know we've kind of been an advocate of the trade back, but we know that it's seeming like it's probably not likely just based off Joe Douglas's tendencies.
Yeah, that was something that I discussed the other day. I think it'll be interesting to see because while Joe Douglas hasn't traditionally traded back, as I said to you the other day, he hasn't gone into a draft with 6 picks.
Right.
He's up to this point, he's gone to these drafts loaded with picks, loaded with premium picks. So he's had, a lot of wiggle room, a lot of the ability to say, you know what, we can spare a pick to move up. This year you got 6. If you trade for Rodgers and you give up another one, you're going in with 5. I can't see them not trading down. Once you get into the trading down thing, I wouldn't want to see him go lower than sort of 19, 20, 21 maybe. I think San Diego's at 21.
Yeah.
Uh, Baltimore at 22 you could live with, but once you get outside of there, that's kind of tough. Compensation, it's just so tough to say. Like, we always say that when it's compensation for a quarterback, the price goes up.
Mhm.
And there are some people saying they think Will Levis could fall to 13. If Will Levis is on the board and someone calls you while the team at 12 is picking and they say, "Hey, we want to move up if they don't take Levis." Well, now they're shopping for a quarterback. So, yeah, the price goes up a little bit.
Yeah.
But
You squeak out a future one potentially from the Ravens. And if they're
yeah,
moving Lamar Jackson, I mean, depending on what team it is that they're moving Lamar to, they could have high picks or picks in a range where we're happy to take
I
those
still
back.
don't think they're going to move him.
It's hard to find. It's just hard to find all the things to come together to make the trade happen. I feel like you can point to like 5, 6 teams. You could probably point to like 20 teams that could use him, but like 5 or 6 real legitimate teams, and then you just kind of walk yourself back on all of them, and it's like, okay, there's only really like 1 or 2, and one of those is Baltimore. So
But
it's really tough to
the thing
pinpoint
is,
it.
though, and this is what I've said from the outset, who can make an offer that Baltimore won't match?
Right.
If Baltimore lets him go, they they go into football irrelevancy that second.
Right.
And they don't have and the season's, drafts coming and they're going to have no quarterback.
Hmm.
Um they're not you know as Jets fans, we know how miserable it is to not have a quarterback. Imagine the Jets had a quarterback, be it Lamar Jackson or anyone. Let's pretend hypothetically the Jets had a 26-year-old franchise quarterback and they let him walk because they wouldn't pay him what he was asking.
Hmm.
Like now, again, this is a whole nother conversation, but between what's Lamar asking, what are teams going to offer? Once all the quote unquote controversy started with the collusion stuff, I just kind of said we just had the combine. I have no doubt teams know how much Baltimore is willing to pay, and they're
Yeah.
like, oh well, we ain't paying that much. So if you're going to match it, there's no point in us making an offer. Now, look, if is he genuinely going to get angry enough? I know we sent out the tweet and the message, but part of that could 100% be real, but
Hmm.
could also be a bargaining ploy. Like I've often wondered that with players, when these players are in these contract disputes, especially now the days of social media. Why wouldn't you send like a goodbye letter to the fans on your Twitter account? Like, oh my God, he really means it, like because it gives that image, that perception. And again, I'm not saying he doesn't mean it. I'm just saying I don't know. I'm going off on another Lamar tangent because
It's all
I
right.
think it's one of the most interesting stories of the
It
offseason. I
is.
really do. I understand the frustration on both sides, but the thing I always keep coming back to is I don't think they're going to let him walk, and I don't think another team is going to give up, multiple ones for a guy with the injuries he's had. So
Yeah.
that's yeah.
And we had a comment here. Matthias says you can't have players on your team that don't want to be there. And like you said, it could be a bargaining leverage type of play to tweet that out. But if it is real, then yeah, that's kind of a thing. And if you look back at recently, the Ravens, they've had a couple players come out and speak out and demand trades and say they don't want to be there anymore. And that's not a knock against the Ravens, but they have a clear, strict way of doing things that has made them so successful for how many years. So obviously you look at like Rashad Bateman and Chuck Clark, those are guys that have asked to either be, featured more or they just change things in the organization, or they've asked to be traded. So it's not necessarily like a bad thing for the Ravens, like I said, but it is an interesting situation. And obviously if the 49ers want to give up all their 3rd round compensatory picks for Aaron Rodgers, I would probably say, okay, let's pivot to Lamar Jackson, and everybody will get on that bandwagon,
And
posting
I
number 8 in jersey in New York Jets jerseys on Twitter.
Yeah, and I genuinely, like I said, I'm excited about what Aaron Rodgers would bring if he came here.
Mm,
But since I view it as a 1-year bridge, I'm like, if they don't get him, okay. Like it's a weird thing. Like if this was a 3, 4, 5, 6 year thing, I'd be like devastated
right.
if you lose out on that opportunity.
Yeah.
1 year, possibly two, but
I-
maybe
I'll
not.
I'll
Like
be I'll be honest. I'll be really upset if we don't get Aaron Rodgers, just because my fandom for him as a player. Like, but that doesn't mean like I'm not gonna watch him play wherever he goes. Like, I just will do it with a little bit of a sad face because we have Tim Boyle and Zach Wilson. So I'm not like, yeah, I would be way more upset if we didn't get him, because that's kind of been my preferred guy since we kicked their ass in Lambeau. But we can
yeah, I mean, you'd be crazy not to want him on your team, but I think you'd
right.
be equally crazy. Apparently now the thing is the Packers want to one next year. Like next year's class is going to be stacked.
Right, right. This
So
is
the
supposedly the down year in terms of overall top of the line talent across the board. So yeah, I would agree. Give up picks in this draft before picks in future drafts if it's going to be any types of premiums. But like we've said, we don't think it needs to be a premium pick for Aaron
shouldn't
Rodgers at
it
this
shouldn't
point.
be.
Exactly. So with that, I want to get into the mock drafts. Obviously, we said they're dueling mock drafts. So Glenn and I did one each. What site did you use? I think we said we didn't really care. I ended up doing both, and I also did one with a trade and then one with a trade back. So I traded for Aaron Rodgers with one, and then the other one I traded back and kept the second round picks because, like you said, I hung up the phone on Brian Gutekunst on draft day.
Yeah, I did. I used PFN.
Okay.
And I'm aggravated because I have the results up here, but I clicked on all results to see every team's pick,
Oh,
and now
that's
I can't
fun.
see a tab to skip back because
Mm-hmm.
some Google ad just came up and I can't get rid of it. So I'm gonna have to
Love it.
scroll through each pick to get to my Jets picks.
Love it.
Um,
All right. Well, do you have your first one ready, or do you want me to go
I
first?
do, I
Okay,
do.
cool. You go first
I
then, because mine is I traded back from 13 in this one.
Okay, yeah, fine. I went with Darnell Wright, Tennessee. He was the best tackle on the board. Like I said, he's a guy that I was hoping would fly under the radar. Thought that maybe he would no, that is not crazy at all.
I
Um,
waited. I was hoping that you would take him so I could put up Braden's second comment here. It says I'd
yeah,
rather have Darnell Wright than Broderick Jones. Is that crazy? And Glenn
that is
Glenn
not
says no.
crazy
I
at
say
all.
no as well. I say no. It's not crazy.
Not at all. And that's who I'm taking in that spot. I'm shoring up the OT spot and going from there.
All right, cool. So I as well stuck on the offensive line, but I traded back from 13. The Saints were willing to move up with the pick that they got from Denver for Sean Payton. It's still so weird saying that out loud. The pick that they got for Sean Payton now moves to New York, and they also gave us their second round pick, which, if you remember, they originally are picking 10. The Philadelphia Eagles just occupy that spot. So their second round pick was high. I was able to get 29 and 40. I gave up our sixth round pick at 207. So I moved back 16 spots. I kind of played the PFN board a little bit, but I also feel like if Joe Tippmann was the first interior offensive lineman to the Giants at 25, like in DJ's latest mock, John Michael Schmitz at 29 isn't incredibly out of the realm of possibility. I didn't want to move back too far to kill the Jets, but I felt like taking 29 and 40 in this scenario was way better than anything else I was getting. So I got John Michael Schmitz to be the pivot point of the offensive line for hopefully 5, 6, 7 years to come.
Yeah, he if you get any of these centers, any of these top guys, and even in the later rounds, someone I mentioned the other day, Ricky Stromberg, Arkansas. Like
Yeah.
when I watched earlier in the year, I've watched a couple of their games now, but the first game, I think I watched them a little bit last year, and then very early this year, I think they played Cincinnati. It was like week 1 or 2. It was very early on, and I watched that game, and I think, as a matter of fact, I think it was fun because we talked about how many times during the year, Reese's Senior Bowl, Jim Nagy, they would tweet out players we were talking about.
Yep.
I think Jim Nagy tweeted out about Ricky Stromberg, like,
Senior
literally
Bowl.
as I was watching. Yeah, there you go. I was literally sitting watching the game, to watch Ricky Stromberg, and it was either while I was definitely within a couple of hours. I'm on Twitter and Jim Nagy's shooting out a tweet saying, "Hey, Ricky Stromberg, center Arkansas." I was like, I'm literally just watching him.
Yep.
And I like him. If you can get him a little later and not get a center early on, I'd be fine with that. But I think I like Tippmann. Tippmann's my top guy.
Hmm.
As if anybody's at home is concerned who my top guy is. I'm sure everybody's taking notes now. But yeah, I like Tippmann, but I like Schmitz too. I would happily take either one.
Now you got me interested, because for the people that do care about our rankings, I wanted to see how far away I have. John Michael Schmitz right now is 23, and it's a very incomplete incomplete list looking at mostly Jets needs. So Michael Schmitz for me is 23, and I have all the way down here. It's really not that far. Joe Tippmann, 33. So 10 spots away. I feel like the value is pretty much the same. I would take Tippmann in that range of the second round, maybe. I'm spoiling your pick or something here at 42, but we'll get into the second round now. You have two second round picks because you didn't trade for Aaron Rodgers. I now have 3 because I traded back with the New Orleans Saints. So if you just want to give 42 and 43, and then I'll go with my second round.
Yeah, 42, same guy we took last time. I'm taking Tippmann again. And
Yep.
and at 43, I'm getting my guy Dan Henley. I've seen people talk about him as a third or fourth rounder.
Yep.
I just think his athleticism, I think he brings stuff that other guys don't bring. And he's still fairly new to the position. That's another thing. Like he's still learning and playing at
Mhm.
the level he's playing at. So some people might say that's too early, and I say I don't care what you say. I'm taking him.
Yep. So great picks there. Actually, we have some overlap. I'll get into it. But at 40, the pick that I got from the Saints, I was very torn here. I wanted to go Mozzie Smith because they had met with him. But because I didn't go offensive tackle and I knew I had 2 more picks behind me in the second round, I could get a player that I liked at a different position while also establishing a tackle presence. Because as comfortable as I am with the offensive tackle position, I think at worst they need a guy who can be a backup this season to work into a long-term starter role. So Matthew Bergeron, offensive tackle from Syracuse, that's my guy at 40. And then getting into our normal allotted picks, 42 from Cleveland in the Elijah Moore trade, I took Deion Henley. So a pick earlier than you, even though you like him. That's funny. I took Deion Henley at 42, and then at 43, I came back and attacked the safety position, and I got Jordan Battle, a guy that I talked about on my most recent video. I was torn about a couple other safeties, but I ended up going with Jordan Battle. I know there's a couple safeties I like in the third or fourth round range, but due to the fact that we didn't have a third round pick, I didn't want to hope my guy was there at 112 in the fourth round. So I went with Jordan Battle, one of PFF's most consistent safeties out of Alabama.
Yeah, I think I mean not it's I think I laid off safety because I
Mhm.
think what was it a few weeks ago when I can't remember if I did an article or discussed it on the air. I may have done both. I think they like Tony Adams. And
Yeah,
I think between Adams, Whitehead, Clark, maybe, is Davis, is Ashton Davis a backup again?
right.
I think they might have enough there to say either if they're going to take a safety, it'll be really late or try to get another undrafted free agent. I'm not saying they won't. I mean, like I said, like there's some guys I like. But I look at the day 3 guys and that's where I'm like, well, maybe that's where you can get Jason Taylor,
Right.
even though, you know, it's such a crapshoot with these That's why I always think it's funny when you see these draft sites that projected range, between rounds 3 and 7. Like they don't know.
Oh
Everyone's
yeah,
just
it's
guessing,
real easy. Yeah.
and it may have been you and I actually speaking the other day and saying that, they say the way teams rack and stack boards and grade guys, there might be 2 points separating a guy who goes in round 4 and a guy who goes in round 7.
Exactly.
The grades can be very, very similar and it goes into need and all that. So like I look at a Jason Taylor and I'm like, I think I did say to you the other day, this year he's my Michael Clemens. Like last year, I watched Michael Clemens. I specifically remember against Alabama because he had some great reps against Neal,
Yeah, he
Evan
did.
Neal, the tackle. And so then I watched a couple more games and I was like, wow, this guy's a player.
Hmm.
And then I went on PFN and PFF and all these sites, and they've got him ranked like 500, 600. I'm like, I guess I'm crazy because to me, this guy looks like a draftable prospect. They
Right.
got him as the 500th best player in the class. They
Hmm.
have dudes that aren't even in the draft this year ranked ahead of him. Um, and then he gets drafted, and I feel like that's where the
Pretty
Jason
high
Taylor
too,
Jr.
117, I believe, right?
Yeah, and
Yeah.
whereas Jason Taylor Jr. is when I looked the other day, I think he has an undraftable ranking in PFN. So maybe I'm crazy, but I would take him in the 5th or 6th. But a safety that early, I would just be a little surprised based on the fact they have Clark. I think they like Adams. They're keeping Whitehead, but we'll see. I mean, good player. Don't get me wrong, but
Yeah.
I'd be surprised.
Yeah, and if you went back and watched my video on Monday, I had talked about Christopher Smith, who wasn't on the board. He had just gotten taken in this mock, and Jordan Battle, and then the guy I was thinking about reaching on but didn't want to, and hoping he was there in the 4th round was kind of a prayer. Was Quan Martin from Illinois, but he's kind of
Mhm.
like a Brian Branch light, where he's like a nickel corner more than he is a safety. I think he took like 60% of his reps in the slot. So he's a guy that, like, although we do have a slot guy in Michael Carter, who I love, we both love. If you could add a Quan Martin in like maybe the 4th round, that's probably better value than a Jordan Battle in the 2nd. But knowing that we have almost 80 picks now between picks, it was very tough for me to pick and choose what positions. So I was glad that I traded back and got that 3rd, 2nd round pick. But all right, no 3rd round picks for the Jets. They gave it away to Cleveland with Elijah Moore to move up in the 2nd round. I see you added a clip here. What's this?
This is going to be for the next player I'm taking.
Oh,
I
okay,
should have been I
perfect.
should have
So
been loading clips while we were
no,
talking. Go
that's
ahead.
all right. So we're in the 4th round now. Pick 112. Who you got?
I'm taking Bryce Ford Wheaton. I know I took Darnell Wright early on. I actually considered I was gonna seriously consider nice catch there in double coverage by Ford Wheaton. He's a guy who can burn, and I was gonna take a receiver, either Jordan Addison or Jackson Smith and Jigba were gonna be considerations for me at 13, but they were both off the board, so that made the decision for me at tackle. So I wanted to come back again and grab a receiver, but just sort of the way the board was falling, I wanted a center earlier on, and I thought, you know what, a guy like Ford Wheaton I had in mind, and thought I can probably grab him later on, and not have to worry about not having to worry about the quality of talent. Like, I feel better about getting a receiver in round 4 than I do an offensive tackle in round 4.
No, I certainly agree with that. And if you want, you can load up another clip of Bryce Ford Wheaton, because in my mock in the 4th round, pick 112, I as well took Bryce Ford Wheaton from West Virginia. This is a guy I've talked about on this pod. I went on Green Bean's Patreon and I did a wide receiver pod with him and a couple of his guests. I believe Braden was one of those guests. Shout out Braden. And I talked about Bryce Ford Wheaton, and I got a little, I don't know if I put this like worry thing in Jets fans' heads because I started comparing him to Denzel Mims. If you look at all their combine stats, they're like pretty identical. Their height, weight, speed. They both ran exactly a 4.38. But then you're like Big 10 schools or Big 12 schools, excuse me. So you're kind of worried. I don't know. Bryce Ford Wheaton doesn't give me like, and I loved Denzel Mims coming out. I like verbally yelled when we traded back and still got him. Obviously, it hasn't panned out, but if you could get a Bryce Ford Wheaton, I'm totally on board with it. I see you put another clip in here.
Yeah, that's a fresh clip.
We'll go
I
let
didn't
that one
preview it.
roll. Oh, here he is
Oklahoma,
down in
I
the red
believe.
zone running a
Yeah.
fade. Yep.
Pulls
This is
that
the
in, tight
Oklahoma game.
coverage.
Yep. Yeah,
Yep.
exactly.
And
Yep. He's
hangs
had
on. So,
multiple catches like this. I think he's very good at the contested stuff. I don't
yep,
necessarily consider him a separator but he does have the ability to separate in certain
absolutely.
situations. That deep post move, he was still able to get a little bit of separation at the top. But I think it's a great pick. I think he fits what we need. I think it's kind of surprising hearing you say you were thinking about Jordan Addison or Smith and Jigba at 13, because I was certainly thinking about them at 13. I believe they were all there, but I wanted to trade back and assess the offensive line first. I feel like that was the primary need, but very interesting that we were looking at the smaller guys round 1, and then we ended up with the 6'3" and change Bryce Ford Wheaton height, weight, speed guy in round 4. I believe now you have 2 more picks left, and I only have 1 more pick left. So if you just want to go round out your entire mock draft here, it's 5th and 6th round picks.
Yep, sure. 143. Excuse me. 143 D line, Colby Wooden from Auburn. I think he's listed as an edge, but you do see him play inside and outside. Wins here at the point of attack, sheds the interior lineman. Doesn't prevent the first down there, but holds it to a 2-yard gain. You do see him get penetration as a pass rusher, so he brings a
Mm-hmm.
little bit on both phases of the game against the run and the pass. And really, I think that, we're hearing a lot of people talk about the depth of the D line in this class, and especially edge rushers. Like I said, some have him listed as an edge, some have him as a DT. But I think he can do a little bit of both, and I would gladly take him in that spot. And the last guy, I'm just going to see what I have on him. I believe he was a top 30 visit. Hang on just one second, because even though we've talked about, the Jets running back room being solid, which it is. And actually, I don't know if you saw this, Dylan. It was who was it? Brian Costello said that Bryce Hall, the Jets are expecting him to be ready for the opener, which was
Yes,
surprising. That's the
very
first time I've
big
heard
news.
that.
Yep.
Yeah, but I still want a running back. And so with my final pick, East Carolina, Keaton Mitchell, one of
Yes.
the
Okay.
fastest players in this class. I think this is a play from last year, because he jumped out at me last season and I started pulling clips on him. So he's a guy, as you see there, can take the ball to the house. He's got,
Mhm.
I don't know what he ran the 40 in, but he's got to be a sub 4.4 guy. And I've actually seen him mock to the Jets in a couple of different drafts, but he's not a power guy. But today's game, you don't use those guys as often, and I think he'd be a great complement in the backfield.
So I pulled up his combine stats while you're talking. 5'8" and a quarter, 179 pounds, 4.37. So
Yeah.
absolute burners. And he had a 1.48 10-yard split. So just absolutely dynamic speed. 38-inch vertical. So that's really good for his size. A 10.5 foot broad jump as well. So very explosive speed type of guy. I
And
guess
here's a
like
play. Oh,
if
sorry.
you
No, I was gonna
like
say here's a play where it looks like he's not going to get anything. It's not a big gainer, but that right there looks like that should be a huge loss. But he's
yep,
able to cut back, cut around, and look now. That's a 3 yard
there's
gain,
six
but
guys around him. Yeah.
that saved them about 9 yards. So
Yeah.
we talk about all the time about don't box score scout, right? Because you would look at that and go, oh, big deal. He had a 3 yard run or 3 yard reception. Yeah, he caught the ball and
That move
he's
right there.
he's
Yep.
8 9 yards deep, and so it's he basically could have been tackled 10 12 yards further back, but because of his elusiveness, he's able to make it a positive couple yard gain.
Yeah, and I haven't like studied him in depth, but I knew a little bit about him coming into the process. But I guess if you are targeting somebody like a Devon A-Chain, I don't know if he has that return ability as well to go along with that speed, but you would assume he's done some kind of special team somewhere in college. So if he could be a returner slash, third, fourth running back in your stable of guys that you need, absolutely, all for it. All right, so that was and Wooden. I think it's great. He's number 25 as a defensive tackle. That's just a
Okay.
great number choice for him. All right, so to round out my mock draft, I only have one more selection. Pick 143. A guy I believe I've talked about. I know we've talked about his teammate, plenty of his teammates, but his running mate alongside of him on the D line is Moro Ojimo, defensive tackle from Texas. Another guy that PFF just rates really highly, and we need bodies at this position. So with the last pick, I honestly just went right to D tackle, picked a guy that I knew that I had some exposure to because I wanted to be able to talk about them a little bit here. And the teammate that I was referring to was Keandre Coburn. And
Yeah.
in PFN's mock, they were very closely rated. I think he was a couple spots ahead of him, if that. So
And that's Ojimo picking up a PBU at the line of scrimmage. He gets that left arm up, boom, swats that ball down, or at least deflects it, forces an incomplete pass. I mean, he's big dude in the middle, really good run stuffer. And again, it's a position where the Jets are going to have to address. They've lost some bodies. They've been snubbed by a couple of free agents. And I think Al Wood is supposed to be coming in this week. If he wasn't already, I forget what day they said he was coming in.
yeah, I believe it was either today or yesterday. He was
I
supposed to
was going to
meet with
say,
him. And it's
I
funny,
thought it
they
was
met with Al
Thursday.
Woods,
Yeah.
signed Quentin Jefferson. So
Yeah.
it's funny because we could just pair up those teammates again. And like I said at the top, you kind of do need that two gapping run stuffer. And I think Ojimo can do that as well as being the athletic pass rusher. Like you said, he can get his hand up in the passing lane. So he can give you a little bit of everything. And I think the Jets want that. But you need bodies at DT. So we're going to fill out the needs as with our final pick of the mock draft. So that's it. I think both our mock drafts are great. I'm going to go on Twitter. You could check us out. I'll try to get through to the JetNation Twitter, and I'll put them right on their account. And I'll just maybe I'll put out a poll and see who did better, Glenn or Dylan, because although I did have a extra second round pick, I think you make a pretty compelling case based on your needs as well and your mock draft, because I like who you got at the top, especially the Tippmann pick. I think it's funny that we both took Henley in the second round. He's another player that's just not going to be there in the rounds where you would have
Yeah,
expected him to be
I saw
pre-draft
somebody
process.
say I saw somebody tweet say, "Oh, he could be good value in the 3rd or 4th round." It's like 4th round, like
Nah, he's not going to be
3rd,
there.
maybe early 3rd, but 4th,
Right.
I just
You
can't see it.
I was gonna say, if you're thinking top 75, that's the first like 8 to 10 picks of the third round. I don't know how he's not a top 75 player. It just doesn't
Again,
make sense to
especially
me.
with the athleticism at the
In
position. I
this
mean,
NFL that we live in now, yeah, you need that speed sideline to sideline. And he's not just a speed guy. Like, he is the finish the tackle type of player.
yeah,
So I know some platforms have him as their linebacker one. I know he's kind of gaining steam up there. So yeah, he's very high on our boards as a
I checked that.
linebacker.
I don't know if you saw. I tweeted that yesterday. I got my my football game plan Emery Hunt draft guide.
Yes.
And that was literally I opened up the file and I was like, what does he think of Dan Henley? Because
Yep.
Henley's my guy. Search the name, inside linebacker one, Dan Henley. I was like, there you go. He knows what he's doing. Emery Hunt, come on, he's on it.
Close the
So
whole
yeah.
guide. It's like you
Yeah,
wrote the thing
exactly. There
yourself.
you go. There you go. But he does, but we say it all the time, man. He digs deep. Emery Hunt's got
It's
guys in there. I'm
amazing.
like, forget the player. He's got guys in there. I haven't heard of the school. I haven't heard of the where the college is located. I sometimes I wonder if he just makes a few of these up for a laugh to see if he can get someone to come onto a podcast and talk about them. A
Yeah,
fictional
page
characters.
1372 is not a real player. Like, it's just
That was a bit. Did you ever see that bit? This is years ago. Jimmy Kimmel. He was making fun of people being draft nerds who like to draft too much, and
mm-mm.
I think this is when it was still in Radio City, if I'm not mistaken, and
Bring it back, please.
they sent somebody out there with a camera, like, to interview these fans who were, like, lining up overnight, and they started asking them for their opinions on these players, and they were just making up names, and people were like, "Oh, yeah, he's really fast, and I think he's gonna be a good whatever," and they're like, "Ah, he's not a real player, so we just made that up."
Ooh,
So, yeah, that's the
gotta
thing,
love
you
it.
get put on the spot, you feel like you know everything about the draft, you don't wanna
You got to say something,
you're not
right? Yeah.
expecting them to lie to you, so you're like, "This is a real guy, I better say something,"
I've
you
never
know?
heard of
So
him.
yeah, well, that's the thing. It's it's and I do. There are some draft experts out there, quote unquote experts that I watch, and like I'm like, you throw out way too many bland terms that don't like. You're not giving
hmm
me a specific play, a specific game. Um, yeah, and I wonder, like, have you really ever heard of that guy? Because you just seem to say, "Oh yeah, loves the game, plays hard." Yeah, who doesn't? Like, how many guys you be like, "Oh, it's pretty lazy. It worries me. He likes to sit down between plays." Like that. That's not a thing.
Yeah, it seems like there's a couple one-liners that you can sneak in
Yeah,
about certain positions or certain this or that. Like, I love the deceptive speed for like those backup quarterback guys that like nobody's really
yeah,
talking about. And it's like, okay, cool, but like we said that about like 8 guys last year, and 2 of them are still in the league 1 year later. So
I mean,
what
it
is
is, to be fair though, it is tough. I mean, the draft has gotten so big now. If
yeah.
you're gonna talk about like 300 different guys, how many different things can you say?
Yeah,
Like
exactly.
how many terms can we make up to separate guys?
you really have to say, okay, well, against Georgia, he was, a zero shade and he swim moved the left guard and he got to the
Right.
quarter. Like, you literally have to say something specific and then go through your cliches about him, or else, yes, it sounds all the same and copy paste in all your scouting reports. Yeah, because even just writing up the 50, 60, 70 guys I do every year, it's like, all right, well, what did he do that's different than this guy that I have to like differentiate these fourth round wide receivers in my head. They're great at the release point, but like other than that, okay, body control, catch point, this and that. It's you
And
find
how
those
much time are you
cliches.
gonna put into it? Every year we watch NFL GMs who have entire scouting staffs at their disposal and they screw up the draft.
Yeah,
I'm like,
exactly.
are they doing the whole what is a paralysis by analysis? Like
Yeah.
sometimes just watch a guy and be like, that dude, like I remember, this is years ago, and I was and I remember telling people like I had just gotten to Korea. So you just kind of get what you get in terms of what games are on. There's no like NFL package or, same with college, just whatever games are on are on. And it was just by sheer chance that like 4 weeks in a row, Wisconsin was on. Um, and I said to some people, I was like, look, man, I've only watched like 3 or 4 Wisconsin games like in my life up to that point. I'd never really watched them. And I wasn't pretending to be a scout, and I was like, but this kid, J.J. Watt, like, he makes a play every single game. Like,
Mhm.
I've watched 4 games. He's got 2 forced fumbles, 5 sacks, an interception, 2 fumble like, every single week, he would make a splash play. And, I was on the message boards like, "Oh, this kid J.J. Watt might be," and then, of course, by the time the end of the season rolled around, he was being talked about as first rounder. But
Right.
sometimes just watch the game, you see that a guy is clearly, very clearly, the best guy on the field. Like, safe bet he's gonna be a good player.
Right.
Like, it's overanalysis, I think, sometimes cripples teams, and that's how you end up making bad picks.
So if you didn't hear that correctly, Glenn Naughton discovered J.J.
I did,
Watt.
I did.
That's
Just
what
like,
we heard.
just like Al Gore invented the internet, I discovered J.J. Watt. I was the one who found him.
Oh
Yeah,
man.
but
If
it's
only you told
like
the
I said,
Jets guys about him. Come on.
same thing. Another one. Here's another one that comes to mind. I said to somebody one time, and this was based off. I mean, this is really just dumb luck. This was based off watching like 3 drives. I was having lunch in a sports bar. And it was a college game on, and I'm watching it. And this is before we knew Chad Pennington was going to blow his shoulder out, and every other part of his body. And I was talking to some friends about, some fellow Jets fans, and I was like, man, if the Jets didn't have Pennington, there's this guy I watched the other day, Ben Roethlisberger. I didn't even know how to say his name. I was like, this guy Ben Roethlisberger, he's really like small school, Miami of Ohio, throws accurate on the run. I was like, but the Jets have Pennington, so they don't need him. But someone's going to get a good quarterback.
That's funny. Pennington still goes down as like one of the it's
What
like the
ifs?
worst injuries to watch is that hand injury. I think it was the Giants preseason when his
Yeah,
whole
yeah.
arm
Just
flipped
fell
over.
on it.
Oh, nah. I felt so bad for him. And he was my guy back then. I mean, I grew up
Terrible.
with
He
Chad.
was
Like,
everybody's guy, man, and we
exactly.
thought we finally had a quarterback.
Yeah. And I was
22
like,
touchdowns this previous season.
yeah, I was a little too young for like Vinny. Like, I had a couple glimpses of Vinny, like when they were kind of doing both of them at the same time, like for a couple years, right? It was like 2000, 2001. They were both on the team. And
Yeah,
then
they were
once it
both on the
became,
team.
yeah, then once it
Yeah,
became Pennington's team, I just kind of like I got all the jerseys, the Coles, the Corbett, the Santana
yeah,
Moss. Like that was
yeah.
the squad. I mean,
That was a good group.
that was a great group. So all right, great stories. Any last words before we get on out of here? I know it was a kind of loaded show. We went for almost an hour and a half here.
No, no, nothing else, man. The draft is nearly here,
3 weeks.
and hopefully we have the draft. That's something we got to do next week. Actually, we got to talk about guys on the roster who might be able to fetch day 3 picks. Like, who could they look to trade? Who might
I
have
like
some
that.
value?
Yep.
Not a ton, but I think they have 2 or 3 guys that another team might say, yeah, we'll give you a 6 for him. We'll give
I
you a
was gonna say,
5
yeah,
or
don't go
7.
trading off like every single backup just to get a fifth, sixth round pick. No, I know what you're
No,
saying. There are a
no,
couple
yeah,
in some depth spots that you could flip for a 5 or a 6. Yep, absolutely. So
yeah.
that'll be a great show idea. All right, we're gonna head on out then at this point, almost at the hour and a half mark. We appreciate everybody tuning in. We appreciate Paul Frase for coming on again and promoting his book. That was
Check out his book.
yeah,
Fantastic
absolutely. I'll
read.
put the link right on my tweet thread there. So follow me at Tereman. You can follow Glenn on Twitter at AceFan23. Make sure you're following his draft account at JetsPicks at JetsPicks. Follow JetNation on all social media platforms: YouTube, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook. We're there. We'll be back. I believe Glenn's got a show coming up with Chris Schubert from the Draft Network tomorrow. I'll
Tomorrow
be
night.
back. I believe I'm going to do defensive tackles on Monday, I believe. I've had a couple requests for D tackles, so even though we signed one, I'll definitely get that out. We're 3 weeks away. We'll have to figure out what we're going to do Thursday of the draft because we're not going to go live during the draft. So we'll have to figure that one out, but we appreciate everybody. And until next time, let's go Jets.